I'd actually gotten feedback. And the question was essentially, you talked so much about women, what about men? And in this situation, I would say that with most questions like that, it's about finding the question underneath the question. And I think that primarily the definition of a man or the definition of a woman, it's inherently dyadic, which means that we're defined by the gaze of one another. And so I define men in the negative space of how I define and speak about women. And to describe men, it's almost inherently male-coded because it needs to be spoken of in terms of the collapse of the man, of masculinity, when it goes awry, because that's the only time that you can really understand its nature is in failure. Which is odd because I'm talking about my experience and the sex that I occupy as like a mechanical failure or a bridge or a system falling apart. But I mean, what better way to describe it, really? Now, I think that it is a matter of naming and protecting. I think there's something in the Bible about how Adam names the world. And I mean, actually, even my name means the protector. So I think that there is something to be said about how that diffuses into the archetypes of culture, so to speak. And it appears to be about containing and being strong for other people and to not collapse. And it involves a lot of snap decisions made on limited information. It's less about cultivating and more about being the decision maker, I suppose. There's always been this theory about management that I've really taken to heart, and it is when they look at what managers actually do in a corporation, they don't really do a lot of work. And in fact, a lot of time is just spent being the final point, like the buck stops here, the point of decision. And to be a decision maker who can actually take the risk and be accountable is such an important thing that it actually is more important than the actual thing that's going on. And that's why I get very critical of managers who are performative and just spend all their days in meetings and talking and doing busy work. And then when the time comes for them to actually do their job, they fail on it. There is a huge problem in workplaces where there will obviously be somebody who is disruptive, and there is obviously somebody who's just a liability. And I've had so many managers that are just completely unable to engage with those people and to get them out of the system. Because this is a collapse of masculinity when there's a fear response where you fear being replaced or fear being made irrelevant. So you actually include fractured liability individuals in your organization so that you always have something to manage. So there will always be a crisis that requires you to, give the thumbs up or the thumbs down on, or to consult or to have meetings about. It is a way to generate work. And that is one of the first collapses of masculinity, where you're not being honest and you're not actually providing the leadership that people are looking to you for. That is the problem. Like with women, I suppose there's this sort of constellation of fears based around fecundity and the social sphere. And I think with men, it is surrounding the fear of uselessness, of irrelevance. And that is where we fall apart the most. And, it's there's this thing about, women have pornography that is written. And a lot of times it's very unrealistic. And so the romance novels, I don't want to call them like pulp smut or whatever, but like the plot point is very similar, where it's like a dumpy office worker of no particular note, just like the average woman. But then she falls in love with a CEO who miraculously has a whole bunch of time for her. Now, I've known CEOs, and they don't have time. They don't have time for anybody. They are, if they're loving, they're trying to get a quick bite in while they're doing it. They are, and there's a sort of emptiness and a sort of distractiveness that they inhabit. A lot of them are just pure workaholics, and you will lose relationships to the work just as you will the bottle or the needle. Or the straw. There's no getting around that. And so this miraculous, like, sensitive, beautiful, intuitive man who also happens to be multi-billionaire is having some huge, complicated tryst with the secretary. And, it's strange, too, because it's not even a matter of beauty. It's a matter of complexity. If you're at that level, you can't be around, you can't be with somebody that's not as intelligent as you are, or more so, that doesn't have the same drive. You don't really recognize them as a peer. And so it's unrealistic in that regard. But so the pornography for men, I mean, aside from, like, we're talking about spiritual pornography, and what that tends to be is these brassy, flattened kind of portrayals of masculinity. So I'm thinking like, oh, I'm Irish, oh, my Catholic guilt, oh, that's why I'm such a fucking asshole all the time. Oh, that it's this brassy, ridiculous idea where you can be chaotic and you can justify being the guy that everybody walks on eggshells around. And it's just like, no, get your shit together. You are not there to make other people bear your emotional labor. You cannot be... Like, when we're talking about wait till your dad gets home, we're not talking about you're going to get beaten with a belt because you've been fucking up all day. What we're talking about is wait till your father gets home, because he is a peaceful, organizing person in the household. You could sort of talk about Atticus Finch, for instance. Like, that's what everybody's really thinking about. And there's another way that it fails. So you've got the father that makes emotional labor for his children. So the whole household, and it's a mother wound. It's a, if you're not taken care of as a baby, you'll never really feel like you are loved. And I mean, this is a insight of Gabor Mate, where he's talking about addiction in the sense that taking drugs or engaging in compulsive behaviors, we're thinking like gambling and all of that, it tends to have the same neurochemical effects as the love of a mother, like a warm hug, so to speak. And what you're doing is, if you haven't sorted yourself out, which is the most important thing. I've got a friend that's trying to have kids right now, and for an entire year before even trying, he was like, I got to sort my shit out. And he has gone through a very long, painful process of making sure that he is not going to be a liability. I mean, he has a sense in which he grew up in a very chaotic household, and he was not loved and he was not paid attention to. And if he was paid attention to, it was through proxies. And the parents went through a divorce, and everything that he loved was essentially held hostage. I mean, for God's sakes, like when his parents were going through the divorce court, his father would keep all of his toys in the back of his pickup truck, and then he would drive with the toys to the court dates and just like hold them as some kind of ransom. And I mean, in my own family, I remember my grandfather tried to triangulate his kids. So like one year, the favorite kids would get Christmas presents, and the other ones would be denied them. And it just, but the idea is that like you have to get yourself sorted out before other people rely on you, because that is the biggest collapse, is when you don't do your duty to the people around you. And there's this moment where something happens and you don't want to do it, but there's this party that's like, ah, shit, I'm responsible. I can't avoid this. And if it's difficult and if it's something that you don't want to do, it's just, you hate it, but there's something that pulls you through it. And I think that that's the masculine urge, so to speak. And so you've got the one collapse where it's emotional labor. The other one is to be sort of overindulgent, in the sense that, you treat your children like they can do no wrong. And that's a terrible, insidious form of abuse and neglect, because on the one hand, you ruin people's ability to operate in the world by abusing them, because you train their nervous system to treat every interaction like those early interactions. Children are sort of raw nerves to the world, and they experience everything 10, 20-fold that adults do, and it can traumatize them, and it can reconstruct their ability to work through the world. Like, there's a thing where even 30-year-old people will flinch if they encounter a situation that is like their childhood, and they will avoid, and they will defer, and they will over apologize, and they'll self-sabotage, just because their parental examples and how they were taught the world actually operates in a very fundamental way causes them to flinch. And when you overindulge, that is, protect them from the world too much, you cripple them by not giving them the ability to negotiate with a world that actually requires something from them. If you just give them everything all the time, you're actually denying them love by denying them the hormetic stress of life, so to speak. And I think with men, it's the most difficult task is holding the contradiction of loving people, but also being responsible to guide people as well, to be the objective in the room and to also protect. And there are so many points to collapse and to falter. And it's a matter about holding it all together while you do that, which involves just thinking about yourself, just asking yourself questions. If you're not pacing around wondering if you're doing right by the people you love, then you're not doing it right. You should actually be very, very concerned about what you're doing and what your effect is on other people. There's really no escaping that. And also to be able to apologize. That's a really huge thing, is to actually be able to say, I'm sorry to people. And like a lot of ways, like masculine collapse, like it'll happen so in business, obviously, when you allow, because like your workplace is probably one of the most stressful things if it's not run correctly. So if you're indulging somebody that does 30% of the work and causes all the problems in the team and you're just too much of a pussy to fire them, you are committing 10, 20 people, whatever, to this like borderline cluster B bullshit. Like, get yourself together, man. Like, you have to get them out of there. I know that it's difficult, and I know that it feels real bad, and I know you have to be able to flip a switch between cutting people off and having empathy for people and understanding that they've got, like, no person chooses to be evil for the most part. No person chooses to be disruptive. But at a certain point, you have to understand that it's not your responsibility to make sure that a person's emotional void is filled by whatever. That's you avoiding taking care of. That's you avoiding taking care of it. And so you can collapse in leadership by just being too indulgent in that way. The other way is just, if you have children and you're absolutely frightened of them leaving you, and you're completely frightened of them having their own voice and opinions, and then you create sort of a miniature cult out of your family. Now, one, I've talked about how that basically is the engine of totalitarianism. That is how governments become horrible, is when your parental examples mar you for life, and then you'll always operate in that direction in the political sphere. And then you run into the problem too, is just like, I keep thinking about, how do you make conservatism sexy again? Like, how do you actually get people interested in freedom and liberty? Because I know what the leftists are like, and I know what the conservatives are like, and I know about all the people that are just living their lives. The leftists and progressives, I mean, that's just sort of a matter of, it feels like infantilization in the sense that if you're like leftist and social democrat, and it's just communism. There's communism and there's libertarianism. That's it. And communists are essentially just, when I was growing up, it was very simple, and I was provided for, and there was a head of the household, and I want that leadership to exist out in the world. I never want to have to worry about healthcare. I never want to have to worry about having my needs met. It is a parental projection, and it is an understandable one, because if you haven't been through that process of developing maturity and realizing that the world doesn't work like that, and that eventually you are the person that has to govern yourself, and then eventually your family. If you've had that process interrupted by fear, or the world has been really tumultuous and you don't really understand why it's happening, then you will embrace that part. And that's where a lot of relatively intelligent people go in that direction, just because they've been wounded in that one certain way that never allows themselves to be acquainted with the world. And they deserve pity and grace, but at the same time, at some point, their neurosis comes knocking on your door with a gun. And that is where you have to flip the switch from pity to pain to them if they try to interfere with you. basic self-defense. And with conservatives, there's something very much about how they seem to be folks that have benefited from the status quo maybe 10, 30 years ago. So that's why you'll see like a lot of old money and a lot of people who are successful and have big families, but it was just the structure of society, a generation back where they were most secure. And so they just kind of stick with that forever. And then you've got libertarians, like people who fundamentally believe in liberty as a long-term proposition and care about stable money and institutions and faith and all of the things that, like, there are people who have awareness of like what actually makes a society actually function across time. And those folks are actually vanishingly rare in the conservative sphere. And then when I think about the conservative movement, it a lot of times seems to be, so there's the people that benefit from the system 20 years ago, but it's also a lot of times the party and the wing of the strong family. And the problem there is that you can't view strong family as a homogenous, inherently good thing, because it's all contingent upon what is holding the family together. If it happens to be mechanisms of control, if it happens to be mechanisms that are sort of non-voluntary, if the family is kind of cloistered by a overbearing father figure or an overbearing mother figure, I mean, it can be either, you have to investigate as to whether or not that is the basis of a strong family. Now, when I'm talking about strong families in the libertarian sense, that I believe is the perfect that we're trying to achieve here, because freedom is a principle that exists across all levels of human relationship. So the individual, you are not beholden to your past. And that's a very good reason for excavating the past. It is not to wallow in the past. It is not to treat it as a self-fulfilling prophecy where you're always meant to fail in that way. It is liberation from what has happened to you. So you go into the past as a way to figure out where you went wrong and how you can correct. And then when it comes to be between two people, it is a relationship with no coercion. It is a relationship that is entirely voluntary, where there is a legitimate good faith negotiation going on at all times, which means there are no words that have to remain unspoken for somebody's stability. Everything can be said. There is complete free speech, because free speech is defined by that which you find most offensive. No one wants free speech for the things that make you feel great. So that is, again, part of the masculine containment, the masculine need, is to make sure that you're strong enough to actually hear things that you don't want to hear, because dealing with the intimidating and the terrifying, that is your job. And if you can't handle somebody saying something to you, just words, they can be implicating, they can be insulting, it doesn't matter. You need to make yourself able to hear what people tell you, because that is the only way that you can actually negotiate. And it is your job to make sure that you hold yourself together and that nothing is forbidden from you. And so you move on to the family, and that is, having to be very, very careful about how you deal with your kids, in the sense that, yes, they are sort of half-formed, and yes, they need protection, yes, they need guidance, but it is the constant responsibility to make sure that you are not overbearing and that you're not rewriting them as they're trying to write themselves, that you are listening to them. And though it will not be perfect, you have to leave yourself open to correction. That means that you have to open up yourself and your family to criticism. You need friends, and friends that don't just bullshit you, and friends that don't just automatically support everything that you do and are always encouraging no matter what, because they're afraid of you freaking out at them. I mean, the friends that I have are not my friends because they tell me what I want to hear. It's because I can trust that these are people that have spent a second or a lifetime making sure that they're always telling the truth. And if they lie to you, or if they feel like they've led you astray, they'll come back and talk to you about it, even if it means admitting that they screwed up. And that might actually be a point against their internal conception of just how immaculate a leader they are. I mean, that is essentially that is the point of male friends, is like, you need to have somebody around that says, what the hell are you doing? You need somebody that actually has the courage and actually loves you enough to risk the relationship, even to risk all the convenience, to risk the help, because there is some greater principle in your friendship than just being bros and hanging around and having somebody to go fishing with or whatever. Men definitely need to look out for one another. Absolutely. So, I mean, that's as far as I go on male friendship. But the point is that it's just, people will get into conservatism because it is liberty adjacent, and we need to take it all the way. And I think that one of the reasons that a lot of liberty-minded people become politically ambivalent or stay away from it, and it's not like a vibrant, youthful thing, because we all know the demographics of a lot of conservative events. We're missing a lot of people. And one of the ways that we push those people away is when some people sense that something is off, that maybe the families just don't feel so together as they appear to be. And it is about being honest in that, like, we have to challenge the conception of strong families as such, and not in a terrifying, judgmental way, or a way that makes you feel like you've been doing the wrong thing your whole life and thus you need to be isolated and punished. That's not the way that it works. It's just opening it up and encouraging people to actually look at themselves, because there is a very fundamental article of grace, so to speak, where nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to be evil. Nobody wants to look at themselves and say that they're evil or they're doing something wrong. And it's all a matter of just pointing out to people that, yes, if you admit that you've done something wrong, that you're not going to be shamed and you're not going to be punished and you're not going to be told that you aren't worthy. We can never encourage people. Like, it is very important that we allow people to admit they've made mistakes, to encourage people, and to do so by containing yourself so that you don't act like a prick when somebody says I'm wrong. That's the only way the world heals. So yes, judging is very important. It's discernment. It's the base of a discernment. But once you've made that judgment, to not become the executioner. That is the big distinction. People will test you, and they will throw all sorts of insults and screaming and triangulation and just weird narcissistic games. And ultimately, it is just a matter of, like, will you still love me if I show you the complete darkness within me? And for some people, the answer is absolutely. And for some people, the answer is you need to be isolated because I've got people I love that I need to protect from you. And again, that is the masculine discernment, so to speak. My friends and I are acquainted with Christianity and study it deeply because, we love capitalism, but we know that a society that is completely uninformed by grace and awe is a non-starter. It doesn't exist. But at the same time, we have to reconcile, there is a reason that there was a strong anti-Christian sentiment and sort of the new atheistic movement, because it wasn't Christianity. It was people in dysfunctional families that were just using Christianity as a map. And then you've got this holy, beautiful thing that has now been denigrated by people that were just using it as a mechanism of control. And this basic system of, like, I'm afraid of my children leaving me, I don't feel like I'm adequate, and thus I need to scapegoat all of the problems of myself. It's a very basic architecture, and if it's not Christianity, if it's not evangelicalism or Pentecostalism or Catholicism or whatever, it can be other religions. It doesn't really matter. It's just a very basic structure of masculine failure and scapegoating. And the women will go along with it because there is this beautiful thing where, stand by your man, so to speak. And that's going to happen regardless. And it's a beautiful thing, and I would never denigrate it. And it saddens me deeply when there are women that are dedicated to people that do to them. And that is another collapse of masculinity, is when you take the divine feminine and you use it for your own purposes and you destroy it with your inadequacy and your inability to self-assess. And these people will turn people away from freedom because they associate freedom and self-determination with, oh, okay, so I'm just going to help out a petty tyrant. The problem with COVID was that this was actually a conspiracy, which I tend to think more was about negligence and more about the failure to actually speak up when it's important. There is, to be a man is to have that part of you that knows you'll never be able to live with yourself if you do the wrong thing. And so when people don't have that, your society dies. And this is a tiny death, and hopefully one they can recover from. But the tragedy with COVID was that if you were a shit organization and you were right about COVID, you benefited from the broken clock being right twice a day. And the government failure has now made it has increased the power of petty tyrants. And so they can always look to this one thing. You see, I was right about COVID. Ergo, I was right about everything else. If you're in a dysfunctional family, there is an outside world that is constantly making a case to you to inch yourself away, to provide you a better system of being. And when you do something like this, where you take the highest authorities in the land and you say that not only are they corrupt, and not only would they be happy to see you die for money, but you cannot rely on them as opposed to your oppressive system that you're in. And that is one of the biggest tragedies. I can never forgive the state for doing that. I knew it was going to happen in one way or another. I mean, in the 70s, I know most Rothbard and Bloch were always thinking that, maybe it was going to be a mental health thing where they made the idea of freedom and liberty to be a mental health disorder, and then the asylum system would capture all of us. And it's funny because they blew apart the asylum system. As anybody who has ever ridden on public transit or, gone to any major downtown center and seen the tent cities, we're supposed to fix climate change, but we can't take a few tents down. But anyway, so the mental health system has been blown apart. So it seems like the way that they'll have Cassius Belli to do whatever the hell they want seems to be based upon hygiene, essentially. And it's bloody terrible. And I think, too, when it comes to... I talk about unjust authority a lot, the authority that hasn't earned its place, because it does so by coercion. It does so... the thing about violence is that it's essentially overwriting someone's past and future without their consent. So gaslighting, which is a form of fraud, and threatening to beat people or even scream at them, or to manipulate them, or to otherwise impose a structure upon them in a way that is not honest and is not done with self-reflection and is not done with love of the other person. That is violence, and that is overwriting. And the definition, I suppose, of earned authority, and I mean, I can make a more academic case for this than I have, but to speak from the heart, it does seem to be about authoring, because authority and author have the same root word, which means to create, and it is authoring that which you have rights to do so, which is yourself and your own behavior. And then in a relationship, it's the third thing between you, the thing that you build together. And I think that the most redemptive act is to build something, and to build something between two people. And it is redemptive to make a loving household where children will actually have a chance, because the world is... there's that quote from Seven, I think, which is the world is a wonderful place and worth saving. And I don't know if I can agree with that first part. I would say that there is a lot to be hopeful about. It really is going to be okay. As much as it doesn't feel like it's going to be, it's honestly going to be okay. People have been figuring this stuff out for millennia. It's an insight of Molyneux where he just says, if you think about your ancestors falling in love with people who didn't have dental care and haven't bathed in a year, and there would be famines, and there would be wars, and there would be man-made horrors beyond our comprehension, to quote Tesla, I think. And they still managed to make it work. Like, I understand, like, you've got the doom scrolling and you've got your echo chambers where everything is shit and nothing's getting better. And, ironically, the technology that allows us to communicate with each other so well has also allowed us to engage in these loops of self-fulfilling prophecies, where your worldview is informed by watching 8,000 Instagram reels in a row about how degenerate and how falling apart society is. And then that becomes sort of that becomes your entire worldview. And then you think, yeah, everything is terrible, and it's a feedback loop. And I mean, violence has gone down, and you've got so much more opportunity than you used to. And I think if you've got decision fatigue, if you're obsessed with how many different directions you can take, it just means that you have to take the leap of faith a lot more seriously than people used to. I mean, I back in the day, like if we're talking like 1500 or something. It's interesting how you would, if your great-grandfather was a blacksmith, your father would be a blacksmith, your grandfather would be a blacksmith, you'd be a blacksmith. And because society didn't really change that much, you had access to like I don't know, like a 70-year-old man, for instance, who had gone through all of the exact same things that you were going to go through. And you could ask him, and then you could ask the 50-year-old and the 30-year-old. And the amount of institutional wisdom and lineage there, I mean, that is completely irreplaceable, because, I mean, you can't ask boomers or Gen Xers what the hell's going on. Like, it's a completely different world in a lot of very significant ways. Which is why we retreat. This is why we retreat to archetype, because those are the things that persist across all of the technological upheaval. I mean, we tend to cling to archetype because that is sort of like the grandfather that exists through time forever. And there's the fun and interesting task of seeing how those archetypes actually map onto humanity and society, which is why it's so important to think about it, which is why there's this obsession with me, at least, with like, the divine feminine and masculine. And I mean, this is me trying to capture what the hell I'm even supposed to do. And I suppose just letting you in on the process. And, it is, when I try to think about relationships, I think in terms of failure. I don't know, like I think back, like, the first time that I ever remember being repulsed by my own cruelty, it was actually in kindergarten. There was this kid that was just following me around and annoying me, and I ended up having enough. And then, like, this little playhouses, I stuck him behind the door, and I like smushed him behind the door. And even today, that really sits with me. Like it is actually a very, very uncomfortable memory. And, I mean, everything was fine, but I mean, it's so much worse because the kid eventually, he had that surgery for seizures where they cut your brain in half. I remember he had a mushroom cut, and they didn't shave his head. They just shaved the center of it when he came back like 6 months later. And even to this day, I cringe. I cringe at that. And, I mean, sorry, Daniel. There are a few things like that. I remember once I referred to myself in a job interview as a Renaissance man. I was like 18 or something. And like even that, I'm just like, oh. And I mean, it's, remember when is the lowliest form of conversation. And I'm thinking back to I think back to high school a lot, because there is something about adulthood that hardens you and sort of forces you into heuristics, and you drop down into stereotypes. And again, one of the things about it, the whole point of meditation and psychiatry and psychology is to make sure that you're never beholden to those loops of heuristics and that architecture that you've built up as a matter of survival. You always have to leave sort of one eye on the world unfiltered while you develop all these strategies. And so I remember the first love or whatever, was incomplete. And it was this, it was just like this classic thing where you meet a girl and, you don't realize what she's doing. So like I'm in her basement watching a movie, or, you know, there's this thing about memory, which every time that you remember something, you actually overwrite it with your memory of a memory. And so it's sort of like generational loss. Like if you take a photocopy and you photocopy the photocopy, and eventually it turns into fuzz. And so there's these memories that I have of her that I don't want to remember because it degrades the purity of them. But I remember there was like this moment where we're in her house alone in the fall around 3:00, and there's a window open and there's wind chimes, and I can hear the drapes going because there's like sort of a soft wind, and we're just, you know, the adult me would think you're alone in the house with a girl. Like, this is not an accident on her part. And she's just standing across from me, and I'm standing across from her. And, you know, I ask her, just like, can we go out? Can we date? Can we do all of that? And then she looks perturbed and she's like, no, I don't really feel like it. And again, like, it's just downstairs in the basement watching a movie. Again, completely empty house. I mean, like, what are you doing, buddy? But, you know, back in those days, I mean, there's just something about the instruction that I had on like love and sex and relationship. It kind of boiled down to like, don't touch that, you'll break it. But it's just like, just to lean over and kiss a girl is like, you need notarized permission from the Pope to do it or something. Like, you need to be waved in with those air traffic cones or something like that. And so we kept having all of these moments of failure. And it's really funny because it's just like, what exactly is the violence in leaning in and kissing somebody? Really? I mean, what exactly? But even still, like, it didn't even seem like a violation of the person. It just seemed, it's your own encounter with your own fear. Like, there's a lot of these things where it's just like the first time that you actually do it, it is a lot like stepping off of a ledge. It's the same sort of sensation. Not that I've stepped off a lot of ledges, but I've had that sort of call of the void, so to speak. And so there's all these failed attempts, and, you know, and I would hear people talking like, oh yeah, you know, I think she likes you. And it's just like, yeah, I heard her talking about you. And all those situations where she's obviously leaving herself open to it. And after enough frustration, I just launched into this wounded, resentful, boyish, insulting diatribe at her. I wouldn't even say it's necessarily incel energy, which, you know, I've never really inhabited that because I don't know if it's just I'm too self-critical, but it's always been a me problem, not a they problem. I can never think there's a flaw with them. I just felt inadequate, so to speak. And I can never embrace the men going their own way thing because I think that I'm fundamentally defined by the feminine gaze anyway. So like, even if you choose to never care about women again for the rest of your life, well, a woman is still in some way overruling and they are the suzerain of your life if you're avoiding them. So like, there's no avoiding the feminine gaze, internal, external. You've got anima, animus. Jung was right about it all. So yeah, I just freaked the fuck out at her and just like, how dare you? And just all these sort of wounded things. And I mean, you know, like, much in the same way that I feel terrible about smushing that kid in the playhouse. I can't even talk about it without, I laugh because, I mean, I would tear up otherwise, but, it's the same sort of thing where I feel like, I could have pity for myself and both of us. Like, I mean, the kid was just reaching out to somebody. Like, I mean, even the most heinous things that I hear from somebody, I mean, that's one of the things. Like, to be a man is to just, when somebody says something to provoke you, I mean, it's about knowing the difference between whether or not that provocation is a way to intimidate you or if it's just a way to test you. And knowing the difference is the biggest part, because people will test you and they will freak out at you, and there will be a lot of nothing fights, and there will be a lot of, here are my chaotic emotions, please, for God's sakes, help me sort them out. Women wouldn't be crazy if God didn't need them to be, I suppose. But the point is that like, so the kid was just trying to connect with somebody, and I misunderstood, and I didn't understand what he was doing. I thought he was just annoying me. I thought it was just about me. I mean, God only knows what happens in his life, right? And then with her, it's like the classic thing where like, you know, divorced parents, and I mean, my parents were married. I mean, they were married, and her parents were divorced. And there's this thing about divorce where, you know, it's never really articulated properly to the children. So what you have in your head is, okay, so people will fall in love in the deepest connection possible, and they'll have children, and like she had a sister or has a sister, and like there's this whole family made, and then it just blows apart. And nobody sits down and says, this is why we had to split apart. So her internal map of relationships and love is just two people fall into the deepest bond possible, and they create life itself, and then it just falls apart. No explanation. So the parents divorce, and you're just left thinking like, here's the deepest bond possible, and then it just blows apart. So she, with a heart that can be broken so easily, approaches love itself. And in the back of her mind, there's always this time bomb of like, if I involve myself in this, I will have my heart broken, and I'll end up like my mother. And there's just no explanation. So there's just always this precipice. Like it's just, the rug is going to get pulled out from under you at any point. And so of course she's uncomfortable with intimacy. And of course she doesn't necessarily give off all the signs, because she's scared shitless of it, like in a very deep spiritual level. And with me, I had no frame of reference for that. I mean, if I had, God only knows what would happen. And it's just because like, and then in the end, two people that were just so close to this young love just blew apart because of our mutual unknown neuroses. There's just, you know, I mean, I had my own hang-ups and freezes towards intimacy, and I had my own feelings of inadequacy that would stop me from doing that. And I mean, God, the worst part of it was, I worked with the guy that she ended up dating was a drug dealer from out east, and I mean, he was a nice guy. That was the worst part. But I just remember like, so we worked in a warehouse together, and one day he shows me like one of those giant like kilogram chocolate bars, and I forget if he put it down his pants or like he put it in the inside of his uniform or something. But he's just like, hey Ray, come over here, check this out. And then he looks up and he's just like, okay, there's a blind spot in the camera, right? So all you do is like, you take this stuff over. And then he showed me this kilogram chocolate bar like stuffed in his pants. And I'm just like, Lord, why have you forsaken me? Why this is the, like, because, you know, I like we had a huge fight, and then I said heinous things, and she as well. But it's just like, I mean, so I had the blow apart, and then I'm just dying for weeks about this. And then this is who gets her heart, is a fucking guy stealing chocolate bars, risking thousands of dollars in income and a criminal record in multiple directions, by the way. And he's the one that gets her. I mean, they break up eventually, but it's just like, Jesus, like just what an arc to experience. And another thing too is like, when it comes to the anti-psychiatry, I mean, that is, so yes, there are like psychiatry, like SSRIs and giving everyone fucking Valium, which is insane. Like benzodiazepines. I mean, it's a bit more famous now. I mean, even like Stevie Nicks said that benzos were worse than cocaine. You know, not medical advice, but like, Jesus. Working in pharmacies and compounding labs and such, and just, you know, every so often people that were addicted to them, they would always run out early, and they'd be jonesing. But anyway, yeah, so it's just with anti-psychiatry, like people don't like psychiatry because, you know, in one way is like, because the public healthcare system can't afford to do long-term therapy, but also the fact that like, to fix the mental health crisis is to fix society and give people a reason to wake up in the morning. You can't do that. No matter how much money you throw into therapists, you're not going to make up for a shit society. And, you know, the other thing too is that like, the drugging people is a lot more cost effective, and it's more of a homogenous sort of monolithic solution, which the government loves. Like, there's a whole thing. I have an article called the SSRI of the storm, which is sort of my anti-psychiatric screed in one direction. But either way, they don't like psychiatry and they don't like psychology if it implicates them. They'll have other bizarre systems of dealing with yourself. I had a Christian Scientist friend. Now, if you want to talk about a bizarre way to deal with mental health, and it is something strange, like, so the same thing with like this guy that's gearing up to have kids and getting all of his shit together. We had a conversation about like crying, because it is very odd. Like I've been embarrassed to cry. Like I've absolutely done the whole like, oh, there's something in my eye. There's a story that I identify with about, I was reading somebody doing a review of Up, and obviously like the married life interlude at the very beginning of the movie. And I think the line was like, thank God I was wearing those 3D glasses because I was crying like a bitch through the whole thing. So I was embarrassed about crying, but when I really thought about what the hell it means, like what is there actually to be upset about with crying? I think what it is that if you see like a male, like a masculine provider crying, it's destabilizing, because to cry is to show some kind of crack in the armor, so to speak. But the thing is if you're crying, if you don't have the attending apoplexy where you break down into a heap, like if your crying is not preceding a mental breakdown, then you're just in touch with awe. And you can't be a man unless you're actually in touch with awe. There's no way of avoiding that. And, so this guy who got all this shit sorted out, or is trying to, it's a process. But, he says like, I cry in awe all the time. Like it's just because he's a musician, and it's just his brain is wired for that. He hears a piece of music that gets to him, and there you go. And I try to think, and think about crying. Like the conclusion was made that like, when I was a kid, I would cry and like my whole head would explode with snot, basically. Like it was just like you turn red and like your whole body heaves, and it's, I believe they call it ugly crying. And then I stopped. And that was around the time where I just sort of hardened up and had to work in shithole industrial horrible stuff. And so I try to think about what actually makes me cry, and it does tend to be music. Like occasionally I'll think about if people do it. And I know that if I'm writing something very heartfelt to somebody, I take it as a sign that like, okay, I've actually done something. My subconscious has indicated to me like, yes, you have said something genuine and from the heart here. And that's how you know that it's real. Like it's a very important part of communication where you have a somatic response to something that you've said. And in terms of that metacognition and knowing if you're bullshitting and if you're engaged in a heuristic, I think that crying is absolutely the symptom that you've done something real and present, so to speak. And I think about, music does it for me. Like I'm thinking like, so there's a couple of songs. There's Marcy, the Joni Mitchell song. And just because it's so fucking sad, like there's something about the way, like writing down, like if you said like, yes, a girl lived alone and then a guy left her and said, wait for me. And she spent hours a day thinking about him. And then she walked around in her life and then she moved back home. Like that doesn't mean anything. But if you like the way that the poetry gets into her head and the composition and the way that it's done, you feel like that person for a moment. It is a way of transmitting another person's consciousness into yours. And so you cry as they would feel. It's a pretty sacred experience for me. And like if we're talking about like gender equality in the workplace, like that's a whole other thing. But we obviously know that gender equality in the workplace is really just the battleground is air conditioned office jobs. If somebody throws a frisbee into an electrical substation, it's a man that's going to be taking that out. Just, but so I'm totally there. And when women present you with a complete fucking shit test of gender equality, but not for the mining jobs, I think that is them asking you to like, please contain my bullshit, because obviously I don't exist in the real world and my emotions do not allow me to be rational. So please lead me into a better conclusion. And so that is your masculine obligation to say, that's fucking stupid. You say it in a nice way. Like, you're diplomatic, because you can't be intimidating to people. You have to make your case in a way that just shows consistency and that your ethics are consistent. You know, it's, if your kid runs to you and they're upset about something and they have a moment of vulnerability, you have to be able to always take them with open arms. You can never denigrate their feelings or make them feel stupid for having an anxiety. And so, yes, I will deflect in sort of a humorous way that you just have to say this completely, like, what are you doing? What are you doing? But again, it comes from a real place where they're trying to be egalitarian. And egalitarianism is a good instinct, because that is what keeps children alive. And it is sacred, and it feels annoying when it's put into the rhetorical sphere, but you can't be a prick about it. You always have to be nice about it. And so the two songs that really get to me are actually the Wanda Jackson song, Silver Threads and Golden Needles, not the Ronstadt one, and then Coat of Many Colors. I mean, and the reason for that is because, so if we're talking about what your feelings of inadequacy as a man are, it's that you're not getting that bag. Like, you're not making enough money. No one is going to love you unless you can provide chests full of gold and private jets and whatever, right? And these songs, these are women genuinely saying that, no, we value connection and we value demonstrated love. It's not just some bullshit materialistic thing. And so it's because you're feeling like love is essentially at the end of like this endless treadmill where you'll never be good enough to achieve it. And the reason that these songs are so moving is because it's I mean, you know, Dolly Parton is no slouch. Like, she is, like, I don't know if you can get like a more sort of divine woman, honestly. I mean, somebody that giving and somebody that talented, etc. Like, I know she's got her thing. I mean, she's an entertainer, but nevertheless, like, she means what she says, and especially in that song. And just, you understand that, like, it gives you motivation to actually get your shit together and to actually be a loving person without pretense and without having to be constantly beholden to this unattainable goal. And so they're quite healing in that regard. But yeah, they get me every time. Like, I can't be in the room with them. I mean, same with Sunday Morning Coming Down, Christofferson, not Cash. I mean, Jesus, like, I mean, if you want to talk like Marcy, I mean, as sort of like the feminine sadness, like, that is what it feels like to be a man on the brink. Especially just like the sound, like the Sunday morning, chicken cooking. You picture like a family sitting down and like your children laughing in the background. Like, when you're in some deep shit, like, that is definitely what you notice. And it's not even, then there's no conclusion to it. It remains ambiguous and open, like life itself. I think about actually Rhiannon, like the Fleetwood Mac song. I mean, again, Stevie Nicks, totally like an uncapturable, because I mean, you know, smart women are one thing, because how do you really meet them? But I mean, really talented ones and beautiful ones at that. I mean, it's like, how could you ever hold, how would you even hold, let alone hold down, but just hold to begin with, to actually have the concept of it. Like, the boundaries of the thou are just unknowable. But yeah, that's what that song is about. It's about like just the ineffable feminine, and it's lonely, but it's also timeless, and it gets me. It's got, like, ever since I heard that song when I was 6 years old, and it completely enraptured me, and it's never stopped. And then I think Bird on a Wire. So I mean, with me, Leonard Cohen and Cormac McCarthy, No Country for Old Men, The Road, All the Pretty Horses, they're almost like additional books of the Bible, like the New Testaments. And not to be sacrilegious or anything, but there's just something that is proverbic in those that really just gets to me. And when you talk, like, Bird on a Wire is it is the masculine confession of everything that really wounds us, and the moments where we actually feel deep regret. So looking through the lyrics of it. So, I mean, he was on, this is also like, So Long Marianne was sort of a love song to Mariana Elian, I think is how you pronounce her name. And I remember when he said that he wrote that for her, or like what he said live was like, I showed this to the woman that I wrote this for. And she said, well, I certainly hope that wasn't written for me. And he's like, oh yeah? It's like, yeah, because my name is Mariana. And I just, that is the smart woman way of distancing herself from intimacy. And, I mean, I love it, and I never change. But so Bird on a Wire, it was written on the same island that they lived on, and it was just a bird on a telephone pole. But it's sort of like the other half of the song. Like one was like an undying devotional song, and this is sort of like the I've definitely done you wrong song. And so it becomes sort of this beautiful expression of what it means to realize that you've done terrible things as a man, or at least what you feel to be terrible. Just so it's like Bird on the Wire, like a drunk in some old midnight choir. I've tried in my way to be free, and that is just you trying to be a person, so to speak, despite all the pressure and all the contradictions, like having to hold those. And if I have been unkind, I hope you'll find a way to let it all go by. And there are lyrics that he doesn't actually have in the studio version, but it's just that I thought that a lover had to be some kind of liar too. I mean, and that is you trying to be lovable, and you're not present. You're existing in a architecture of what you think a man should be, and that's how you communicate yourself to them. And because I don't think it's a line about cheating. I think it is actually it's a line about betraying yourself because you're so desperate to have people not leave you. And I suppose that is the confession of the tyrannical father, and it is the confession of the deceptive lover. And there's another one where, like a night, like a worm on a hook, like a knight bent down in some old-fashioned book. It was the shape of our love that twisted me. Now, if you want to talk about when you freak out and when you act terribly, there is a way in which the desperation and the confusion and the inner turmoil of things gone awry, like you're twisted. But it's also worshipful because you're bending down, presumably before a princess or something. It's a very dense idea. And then I think with this one, like a baby stillborn, like a beast with its horn, I have torn every one who reached out for me. I mean, there's a lot of unintentional, I always think about how you have to be really careful around children because, again, they're like a raw nerve and they don't really understand what you're doing. And you can traumatize them by giving them too much information, too much emotion, too much ferocity. And you have to be very, very sensitive to that. And it's the same thing when you are trying to negotiate with somebody in a relationship, how you can cut without even knowing it. And you have to be able to listen to what other people say and what other people show you. And just to never forget that you'll do your most damage in times when you don't think that you're doing anything wrong. When you think that you've got it all figured out. You have to be able to just... Because that is the dichotomy, that is the contradiction that we live in, is that you have to be strong and you have to be certain. But then you have to flip back and forth between listening to the world and listening to the people around you and softening at an instant so that you don't treat them with that lack of discernment that destroys them or hurts them. And so you always have to remind people that you love and that are in love with you that you are capable of hearing them and that you actually can let the armor down at some point. And, when we're talking about crying, the conclusion that the friend and I came to is that if you're not crying, you're probably depressed. Like you're probably cut off from the world. Like if you're not being able to express your emotions or you have too much shame to have those emotions in the first place, like something has gone wrong. Like That's things like your ability to cry in awe is the thing that means that you're human, but that also means that you're capable of being moved. So if you're crying as a man at things that are legitimate, but you're still keeping it together, like you're recognizing that something has happened, but you're not breaking down because of it. I mean, I think that that's the symptom that you are actually receptive and you're capable of being affected by other people. Because, I mean, in the way that men are defined by women, and how it is sort of the whole point of our lives, you always just have to remember that the setting sun upon one small and scared casts a long shadow, and you should never forget that.